a role of compassion in today's world is to help be the bridge and to see the humanity of the other side. So that when we find common ground, when we do see the humanity of others, that's when peace can emerge.
What if the key to transformation lies in shifting your perspective? Hi, I'm Dr. Payal Beri. Welcome to Reframing Perspectives. Every conversation here is about one thing: how empathy changes the way we lead, connect, and create impact. Each episode, we get to explore deep, authentic conversations designed to expand your mindset. Whether you're looking to transform your leadership, deepen your relationships within your circle, your community, and friends, or gain clarity in your own personal growth, each episode will inspire you to see things differently and take action. If you're ready to challenge your thinking and embrace transformation, you're in the right place. Let's dive in. What if compassion wasn't a noun, but it was a verb? Compassionate. To take moments of challenge, of despair, of frustration, and if you were to create compassion and compassionate, what would change? What would alter in that relationship? What would alter in that experience? What would alter in that scenario if we approached experiences with compassion? This is exactly what my next guests, Sara and Burrell, talk about. They feel so passionate about creating social and environmental justice and dedicating their time to further awareness and solutions to these issues that help individuals and organizations bring compassion into their lives and company culture. Because where there is compassion, which is actionable, it changes the environment, it changes the experience, it changes the emotional connection that we have to each other, something that we are starving for today. And I'm so excited to talk to Sara and Burrell about this, who have studied compassion, who have understood compassion, and have taken this as a movement into the world to create more compassion movements and using it as an actionable experience.
Burrell, Sara, thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited about this because all three of us work in this space that tends to get told that we're too soft and we're too, it's for the weak to be compassionate and have empathy. And it's not the way leaders lead and it's not the way we do things. And anytime I hear that coming out of someone's mouth, it's like, wow, what happened to you? Like, what were the wounds that we need to heal here? And then of course that just sends them into a whole other like place, right? But I and I think right now in the time that we're in with whatever's happening in the world and right here at home, your work and compassion and empathy is the most critical, Like I always say that we see the world that it's going in and it's because we haven't actually applied compassion and empathy and more humane things, but when we do it, it's like, wow, look at what happens. But then we like as humans forget about that. It's like instant amnesia. And then we return back to this one path and we're wondering why things aren't getting better when we're like, we're not hamsters on wheels here, guys. Like we can change. So anyways, I'm just really excited to chat with you guys about this, but I want everyone to know who you guys are. And, Sara, like what drove you into being like, I'm going to work in compassion. I'm committed to bringing a more compassionate world.
Well, thank you for having us, Pyle. And it's a long story. We don't have that much time, so I'm going to try to keep it as short as possible. But I wasn't looking for this work. The work kind of found me in a weird way. But back in 2008, when I was going through a very difficult time in my life, going through a divorce, my daughter was very young and was unemployed. And I saw Wayne Dyer talking about compassion on the Ellen Show. And he said it's the most important lesson to teach our children. That if we taught our children compassion, we could solve the social problems of our world. And
Wow.
I had never heard that before. I'd never thought about how powerful compassion was, and I couldn't get it out of my head. And that night, the word compassionate turned into the two words you see on Burrell's shirt and on my wristband, compassion it. And I thought, oh, that's kind of cool. That could be a bumper sticker. I see it as like the next coexist. So I went after a trademark for stickers and then began living this in my own life. And I realized when I'm compassionate, things just go a lot better, whether it's dealing with a grumpy boss or a challenging client or my ex. When I remembered to prioritize compassion, my life was a lot better. And so I decided I need to make these stickers. I turned into t-shirts that turned into these wristbands. I found out that Stanford has a Center for Compassion, and they had
Run by
developed a
James
course
Doty.
right, run by James Doty. They were looking for people to teach that course. So I was in the first group to be trained to teach compassion. That was back in 2012, 2013. So it all kind of led to that. Now I've been teaching compassion for 12 years. And Compassionate is a nonprofit organization, and we're committed to making compassion accessible. And Burrell has been a part of this journey pretty much since Compassion It has existed. You know, it lived in my head for a few years, but in January of 2012, he and I met, and I can let him tell you how he jumped on board.
Yeah, Burrell, please share, like, what did it mean for you to jump into the world of compassion and then join Sara in building Compassion It?
Yeah, I mean, I would describe my involvement with Compassionate at the beginning as quite serendipitous. So it was a random website, and I saw like just kind of this random fellowship that was designed for people who were interested in social entrepreneurship. And it was something that I had become excited about in 2011, 2012, because I wanted to make a difference in my community and just kind of living for myself. And, how can I become extremely wealthy? I think a lot of times that's what the view of entrepreneurship is, making money. And I wasn't really interested in that. I wanted to make a difference. And not that those two things, can't go in tandem, but I was just interested in social entrepreneurship. And I found this site, and they put us into teams randomly. And Sara was part of my team. And we were just kind of sharing what brought us to this fellowship. And Sara shared her story, and it moved me. I was like, oh, this is very interesting. Turning compassion into a verb. That sounds really cool. And we spoke about it a little bit, and that's where the wristbands came up, the wear one, share one in our distribution method. And it's reversible. It's something that's an action item each and every day. How can I compassion it? And I'm like, that's a beautiful idea. But, I'm coming from the west side of Chicago. Chicago is a gritty city. We do not have as much sunshine as there is in San Diego. And I was initially skeptical. I'm like, okay, all right, like this is cool. I'm sure, yes, if everyone practiced compassion every day, the world would be a better place. I agree with that initial premise. However, will a wristband get us there? And I started wearing my wristband, and it made a difference in my life. Like, it's just a very subtle thing to be reminded to do something compassionate every day. And it's a visual reminder to the people around you that you're the compassion guy now. So now you can't be as rough around the edges. You kind of have to tone it up and live up to what it means to be a compassionate person. And it's quite a positive influence. And from there, Sara also introduced me to program at Stanford, and I realized that there's an enormous amount of depth and research and understanding about what compassion is as a personal habit, and that there's a lot there. There is a there, and it is extremely powerful and important. And more people need to learn about the richness of what compassion is, as well as bring it into a practice. So it doesn't change the wristband idea and people being introduced to compassion just through this very small way, because the door is always open for you to learn more. There are many chambers to the, compassion understanding and the depth of its practice that, we can speak all day, we can learn all day, we can share all day, and it's just a really important pursuit. And that's the journey that I've been on with Sara ever since.
So I want to touch on that. We're talking about compassion, and Burrell, you mentioned the fact that you're from Chicago and there's a lot of grit there. And what I'm curious about is people will admit, yeah, compassion's a nice thing. I get it. It's good. But guess what? My day's got this. I've got this going on. I've got this happening right now. The world's on fire. Like, I don't have time for this, like, softness of what you're talking about. I don't have time to just sit here and be like, oh, what's my compassion moment of the moment? No, no, no. I need to get shit done. Right. So if you were to share, like, bring compassion down from this abstract thought and bring it down into something that is where if you were to help someone understand it, because I think everyone understands it in sense of like, I get what compassion is: be nice, be kind, be this, be that, be gentler, like, all of those. But what does it really mean? Like, what does it really look like, especially for someone who, like I mentioned, would say, yeah, okay, I get it, compassion, support, moving on.
So, one, I offer my well wishes to anyone who would feel that they don't have enough time for the practice of compassion, because that doesn't feel fair. That feels like an unfair situation to be in. And my heart goes out to anyone who feels that way, because that's, partially an illusion that we don't have enough time for compassion, because that's tends not to be the case for most people. If asked to think of a time where you witnessed or received compassion or gave compassion at any given point in your life, chances are that's a warm feeling. That's a warm experience in some way. And that warm experience is around us all the time. There's just so much compassion that we offer each other each and every day. We just don't categorize it that way. It often tends to be something that we consider as unimportant. And there's a lot of reason for that, but it's part of just kind of our view of how we assume reality. And oftentimes that is mostly in the negative, in that, I have to get stuff done. That means nothing's done. And is that true? Is that a true condition? Have you questioned that, right? How much have you done already? Have you celebrated those things that you've done? Have you appreciated those things that you've done? And taking a moment to consider that is always within your grasp if you allow yourself the space to acknowledge that. So that would be my response, is that, yeah, you definitely do have time. And as far as just kind of this idea that compassion is something that is just soft, and, just kind of that discourse, is that compassion requires an enormous amount of strength, right? Even in me pushing forward that you actually do have the space and time for compassion is a rebellion. That's strength. It takes strength to acknowledge that, like, no, I can appreciate the things that I've done. I can create space for me to connect with the people around me. But in that scenario, that's a radical choice. That takes a lot of strength to say, no, I'm going to create space for what I want to create space for. That's not weakness. That's enormous amount of strength.
I was just going to say that also, yeah, it is soft. And why can't we reframe that as a good thing? We're in this place where, to your point exactly, like when you said that part of, think about how much you have already done, because I think what we're really touching on here is the society and the culture that we have built, and specifically here in the US, right? US is embedded in capitalistic culture. So everything runs through this capitalistic perspective, right? Like the hustle culture, the boss babe, like you got to kill it, you got to work hard. If you want big things, you got to do these things. And yeah, of course, you do have to work hard. Like you can't just sit on the couch and expect things to be done, right? You are going to have to make movement happen, but it doesn't have to be in this harsh way. It doesn't have to be where it's harsh against your body, right? Like everything that we think about healthcare, we think about food that we eat. We've just kind of accepted that it's okay. It's almost like when you're dating and you're just like, your benchmark for standards of dating just goes so low that you're like, you know what? The person's so nice. They're so nice. They opened the door. It's like our standards have gone so low that we just are like, yes. And I think kind of think about that as like the way that our society is with capitalism. It's like we've now just accepted like, oh my God, that food doesn't have, it's organic now. And it's like, oh, we have this piece. And so what I'm really hearing is like the word soft, it's like the fact that we have such a jarring response to it. I think we need to pause and think about that.
I actually, to your point, I like to share the posture of compassion that I was taught by one of my teachers, Roshi Joan Halifax. And that is that compassion is having a strong back and a soft front. So it does take strength and groundedness to be compassionate. You are standing up tall, you're strong, but your heart is open, which has a
Yeah.
softness to it. So this is a yes and situation where we can have both at the same time. It is soft and it is strong and hard.
Yeah. No, and exactly to that point of like when we think about old philosophies and we look at those, the yin and the yang, and if it brings me back to like even just if we think about our body, like we have our skeleton, everything is on the spine that is so important for us to have. But yet, like the spine itself is really fragile. We have to be really careful with that too, right? And it's just like I think about that. It's like when someone says like you need to have a strong spine, what does that really mean if we were to compare that to compassion? And when I think of what you're saying is we're in this space where when the world is moving into the space of fear and the world that we have right now, for example, is moving into that space of, we're seeing it around the world, right? This nationalist movement. We've got the Israel and Palestine. We've got Ukraine and Russia. We've got now India and Pakistan, right? We've got so much happening. What does the strength of compassion take in this world that's moving into this space of more of that nationalist perspective?
I'm happy to share a thought about that. I think that a role of compassion in today's world is to help be the bridge and to see the humanity of the other side. So that when we find common ground, when we do see the humanity of others, that's when peace can emerge. But if I'm saying I'm right all the time, you're wrong, I don't even see you as a human, we're not going to get anywhere. But compassion allows me to connect with people that I wouldn't normally connect with because I see them suffering just like me. Compassion is a response to suffering. And I can see, oh, we're alike in this way. I can help create a bridge here so that you're not seeing me in an inhumane way and I don't see you in that way either. So, Burrell, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think compassion is the antidote to this kind of movement. When you see this kind of momentum, compassion is really the value that inoculates us from these kinds of actions and activities. And I would disagree with the perspective that that's the direction that we are moving in, because we see a lot of our institutions moving in this direction, but people are not moving in this direction. If we look around, the average person, especially in 2025, has had an opportunity to connect with people from different cultures in a way that has never existed before. And people connect across these different cultures. That for every incident of people being opposed to one another, there are thousands of examples of where people come together in this kind of way. I feel like if we were to categorize this movement towards nationalism and kind of consolidation, it's happening at an institutional level, and it's kind of a symptom of fear that these institutions feel that they're kind of falling apart, right? What is a nation state in 2025? The answer to that is extremely blurry. People are moving across borders, money moves all over the place, all of these kinds of things are making some of these institutions be afraid because things are moving in a different direction. People are kind of connecting this idea of common humanity is an experience of ours, right? Like it's something that we have within us already, even if we're not able to practice it all the time. So a huge part of our work at Compassionate is infusing compassion into institutions, because the people have already spoken. The people, we want to love each other. We want to be together. We want to have fun and work together. But some of our institutions are antiquated, and they really are based on this rivalry system that doesn't really describe what it feels like to be a human in 2025. We're way more connected than we've ever been, and we desire that connectedness. We want to be together, and the institutions that keep us apart are kind of confused in this moment. But with compassion, they wouldn't feel so confused. So our mission to operationalize compassion, which means to infuse compassion into our institutions so that they can see, this amazing thing that humans, how we interact with each other, how we, create communities, that they can also have this tool in order to connect to one another better. So I would say that, like, yeah, institutions are moving in this strange direction, and we do need to question that, and we do need to confront that.
Yeah. No, you bring up a really valid point about the institutions. I mean, but at the end of the day, the institutions are also made up of people who are running those institutions, who are benefiting from that fear, who are benefiting from that divide, who are benefiting from the polarization, right? And it's because, again, they have kind of created that space where whatever their journey was in their life or whatever they saw, they've now convinced themselves that this is the path in, getting the I over the we, right? And so to your point, you're absolutely right. Like, whenever people say that, oh my God, this is the worst time in the world, like I can't believe about how much, inhumane things are happening across the world and the country. And it's really because we have exposure to it now, right? We have more exposure today because of social media and because of technology to see what is happening in real time in different countries, in different parts of the world, that breaking news, right? That's happening at every single moment than there ever was in a time before that. So in a time before, you would hear about, like, maybe 6 months later, you would hear that, oh, there was something that happened around the world or something, but you wouldn't hear it in that moment. You weren't conflated with this constant, and which is what I think has been instilling more of that fear that happens. And one of my concerns always is that, let's just take India and Pakistan for right now, for as an example, right? First of all, being Indian, understanding a little bit of the context of that is just, you had the British who colonized. They're as they were leaving, they're like, we're not going to leave India in peace. So what do? They create a situation where then it divides India and Pakistan. You get a division of, like, Muslim and Hindu. You get a division of two countries that were essentially one community at one point. And that India and Pakistan have then just continued to do more of that pitting against each other and doing more of the work that was essentially just left behind from the British. And now, as they are again being put in this position where they're striking against each other, I immediately, the first thought that goes through my head is, oh gosh, because of that, it's going to come to the cellular level of the individual who's now going to start thinking the anti stuff about the other person. Media is going to start infiltrating more content of, pushing more anti-Muslim content to the Hindu, pushing more anti-Hindu content to the Muslim, and they're just going to feed that. And so then the average person, even though all of these things are being done at the institutional level and all of that, the average person now gets caught up in the moment and then starts looking at their friends, possibly, even though they say they're not going to look at their friends differently, they do. They start having a little different. We see that happen with Israel and Palestine. We see that happening in the US with all the things that have happened. So to your point, the antidote of compassion, if the average person took that moment of pause, and instead of being like, I'm going to now react to what the media just fed me, to what, like, social media just fed me, and I actually just took that conscious moment to realize, like, okay, no. This isn't my battle, actually. This isn't the reaction that I want for myself. This is the reaction that this institution is benefiting from. And then that's where I see that compassion, it becoming an actionable element in our everyday life when we are bombarded with constant news and everything that's, like, literally, we're craving that human connection like you're talking about, but we're running upstream with these institutions constantly stimulating us with things that show us that we can't be connected.
Yeah, you make a really good point. And what you say, I think, reminds me of what Burrell is often talking about, which is that we are products of our institutions. So it's tough to say we need to teach every individual this skill. But if our schools included this in curriculum and in the way they were run, then that person in India or Pakistan, they don't have to think like, oh, what would compassion do? That's just part of who they are, to then see their friend through this compassionate lens. They don't have to learn it later in life like I did, or like maybe Burrell did, see the power of compassion. And these institutions maybe are the ones creating this division within side of the humans, right? We are products of institutions. So I do think putting the onus on the institutions more is what is needed right now because, yeah, we're products of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do have to be careful in this situation because Pio, I think you really pointed out that like someone else's point of view doesn't have to be your point of view. And as a compassionate friend, I remember this particular scenario where someone reached out to me and told me about an issue that they were having with someone else. And asked me to weigh in, and I refused. I'm like, this is an issue that you have with this other person. I can listen, I can support you, but I'm not gonna get involved. Like I'm not. And the bravery that takes to tell someone that you care about, that cares about you, that like, hey, no, I'm not gonna jump in your fight. Like that's not for me to choose. It takes a lot of strength, right? Because we are social creatures. We want to be a part of the in crowd. Everybody wants to be part of the in crowd. When you go to a sports game, you want to be on the winning team. You don't want to be the
Yeah.
person that's stuck on the losing team. So sometimes that encourages us to kind of make mental alliances with ideas that maybe we don't agree with. Well, compassion helps centers us in a particular kind of way because compassion is how we respond to the suffering of another. And in that response is a response of care. It is a response of kindness. It's a response of connection to that other. And that inspires you not to want to be on the side of harm. And you don't want to harm others. And you develop an incredibly nuanced view of other people that's grounded in this idea that we are all struggling in this world together. And none of us are perfect. And sometimes we have bad ideas, sometimes we have good ideas. And no matter what, we're at the end of the day, we're people and we're connected to one another. And when someone tells me to hate someone else, I'm skeptical. I'm sorry. Like, you got to put together a much better case than, this person is a part of a group that's different than you. No, that's not going to work. Like, you really need to do better than that.
Yeah.
Hi, so I'm pausing the episode for a quick moment and for a quick favor. If you haven't already, if you could just click subscribe, leave a review wherever you're listening to this episode, it would be really helpful. The only way we can know to make sure that we provide the right type of podcast episodes, the right type of guests, and to make sure that we're delivering the type of content that you actually want to hear, it's through your reviews and through your support. Thanks, and now back to the episode.
What would you say though? Let's simplify it a little bit more because I think sometimes people can also get confused between what is compassion and what is empathy and what's the difference between the two, right? Because I think that, people could look at that and to your point, Burrell, that, when your friend asked you to get involved and you said no, people could be like, well, that's not compassionate, because you're supposed to help. You're supposed to be there, right? So what is compassion and what is that difference between empathy?
Compassion is the recognition of suffering, feeling the desire to help, and then having the willingness to alleviate that suffering. Now, empathy is a piece of that. So when you notice somebody suffering, you connect to that feeling. That's the empathy piece. You may actually feel their pain physically. You may resonate physically with their pain, or you may use your imagination and say, I can imagine what that might be like. You're connecting to that feeling somehow. And that connection to the feeling is what inspires this desire to want to help. And that's where the compassion comes from. And compassion, again, is this willingness to take action to alleviate the suffering. But empathy doesn't have that piece. So you can get stuck in empathy because empathy, if you're empathizing with someone who's struggling, that doesn't feel very good. You're connecting to pain, right? Empathy can hurt. So if you don't move on to the compassion side and do something to help and get the positive benefits of compassion and you just stay in that pain all the time, that can cause burnout or empathic distress, which is why it's important to be able to move past the empathy to the compassion piece.
Yeah, I always say that, there's the curiosity sparks the connection. Empathy brings the story to rewrite the story through that. And then you take inspired action. And the inspired action, what I'm hearing, is the compassion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that willingness to take the action. And, one more point on empathy. And, a colleague of mine who is a professor at MIT, Caesar McDowell, he talks about the dark side of empathy.
Mm.
Because one of the things, as Sara stated, around empathic distress and, just kind of putting yourself in another's shoes, one of the things around empathy in perspective taking requires, experience. So if you've never had an experience, then you're leaving it up to your imagination. And the imagination of humans is beautiful, but it can run wild. And sometimes what empathy can lead, particularly at the group level, is, hey, look at this terrible thing that happened to this person that's one of us, and one of the others did this to them. How does that make you feel being connected to that story? Aren't you angry? Don't you hate them for having done this? Which is why when you see certain kinds of movements, they love to lead with, some people say, kind of this victim idea that we're the victims, we're the victims. That plays off of people's empathy, people's capacity for empathy makes us vulnerable to the idea of, if that made you feel bad, then you really need to hate these other people because they're the reason why you feel that way. In this
Yeah.
story that you're connecting to, compassion inoculates us from that because I want to alleviate the suffering. So if you show me a victim, someone who is harmed, I want them to be well. I want to know what caused this and how do we protect them? How do we help them from this kind of situation so that it doesn't happen again? And usually that does not end at hate this other group. Like it's always more nuanced and sophisticated than that. And compassion opens that pathway and opens that door to that form of thinking and reasoning.
Yeah, I always say, I mean, to me, that's empathy manipulation, right? And it's just that manipulation of using that. And to me, that actually stems more from fear induced, right? So you're using empathy, but you're actually using fear and you're manipulating it to look like it's empathy, because I do believe that empathy at its core is the place where you're absolutely right. It opens that door. It opens that door of curiosity. It opens that door of perception of like, how do I understand this person's experience and the imagination going there? But I think that when you are able to have that guidance of knowing what are the questions I should be asking to understand that moment, right? And what are the specific ways that I can get curious about this without it feeling offensive? Or, how do I make sure that my imagination is also not running off of biases? Because when our imagination is running, even though it's wild and it can do all these things, it's still because of the data that's been inputted based off of XYZ that we've received information from. So if we're receiving information from the media, from our TV shows, from commercials, from the newspaper, from journalists, from whoever we're talking to in the community, it's even that piece of just recognizing, how do you use empathy and compassion to get curious, ask questions, get context outside of yourself, right? And then that allows you to take that compassion. And that leads me to like another question I want to ask is that like, how do we begin to evolve the institutions to be more compassionate?
We're still figuring that out. Right now, the tactic is to work with leaders. So I got my leadership coaching certification last year so that I can begin working with leaders. And hopefully then the leaders will decide, yes, I want this within my team and at my institution. I'm working closely with the community college district. And there is a person in the HR department there who is very bought into compassion and believes that it is the answer to the problems that they're having and has big ideas for how compassion can be brought into the organization. So my hope is that this can be an example, a case study that we'll be able to work closely with them in various aspects. And then a few years from now, be able to say, look at the outcomes from an institution that really took compassion seriously and implemented it in these various ways.
Yeah. One of the things, and we've done workshops for hospitals and large nonprofit institutions. And one of the things, on top of leadership, so leadership really needs to be bought in into this idea that compassion can change the way that we do things around here, or improve the way that we do things around here, take care of each other better. A leader with that kind of mentality is definitely going to be able to do a lot within an organization. But when we work with large institutions, we always include a random, like a slice through the organization. And that's something that's important to us, because even if you are a leader who come in and you're like, you know what, I want to make this a more compassionate place. If your directors or your managers do not agree with you on that, good luck. Uh, so you kind of do need buy-in from different pieces of the organization. And one of the simple things, the activities that we do with organizations to kind of help introduce this idea of how to transform, is really looking at interconnectedness and looking at this idea of how we're all dependent on one another. And just kind of remembering that in a workplace, you're not just an individual completing tasks, you're part of a community. And if you work 40 hours a week, that is a significant amount of your time on this planet being spent in community with others around you. And that kind of creating a more warm connection between you and your coworkers, and kind of just journey that you guys are on together, is the first part of transforming the culture of how we treat a workplace. And that culture shift can start to create the kind of policies that are necessary to create the kind of leadership that's needed within an organization, to really start to ground people and remind them of their humanity. So like, that's where it starts. That's a door that's always open for us. So, if you got 90 minutes of time, we can start on that process.
Yeah, I think that there is a lot of work that's shown that compassion is really powerful in institutions. And I look at that from the angle of, like, if we see, for example, in the Scandinavian countries, the way that they have designed prisons, where there's more humanity in the way that they treat the individuals in those spaces. So instead of them being locked up in these ways, they're actually given tiny homes within the space and yard. And they're actually, they're the cooks. They're the ones who are kind of been given the responsibility of coming together. They're cooking, they're cleaning, they're taking the janitor roles, all of these things, but they're living in community. And it's the true reformation that we say that we want to have happen, in the systems. And we see that happening in places like in Norway, right? In Sweden. Those are things that we haven't implemented here necessarily just yet. But some of the things that do get implemented are through education, right? It's through looking at, for example, if we think about women's rights, we think about women's health, and we think about the way that now in corporate, in health insurance, they do cover IVF, certain places. They do cover these things. Like, I would say that that would be a version of compassion, right? The fact that we're starting to recognize that, hey, if we want to have employees that feel committed to our work here, that feel committed to being at this organization, we also need to be in consideration of what we can provide them, for care, right? And so to me, that is a form of it. And of course, I hear you. What you're talking about is like on a more tactical level of, like, of course, how do you get to that senior executive leader who believes in this, and then through the work, trickling it all the way down. But how do you get buy-in to an executive to believe in that compassion is going to be transformative for the culture and for your organization? Because they're obviously thinking always about their bottom line. They're thinking about, their product, their innovation, all of those things, right? Like, what's going to keep us up with our competitors or even beyond it. So what role does compassion then take in that space?
Well, first off, I'll say I totally agree with you. And in fact, I wrote a book called A Case for Compassion: What Happens When We Prioritize People on the Planet. It gives various examples of several different institutions that have done the right. They are prioritizing compassion, and it's supposed to inspire us to move in that direction. So yes, all of these institutions, there are examples somewhere in the world, and even some in the United States, where compassion is a pillar and a priority. As far as how do we influence leaders, I do think that there are compelling cases that show that it's not an either or situation, that compassion doesn't come at the expense of performance. You can have compassion and meet goals and have high performance. I don't think it's one or the other, and we can point them to examples of that. What do you think, Burrell?
Yeah. So, I think there are kind of two ways to get institutional change. And there is you know, let's find the leaders and they should spare some time to listen to us. And in the cases where that doesn't work, then the people within these institutions need to open the door and invite someone else in if compassion's not going to be a priority. And that's an important aspect of it, in that there are, certain issues that we're facing, today, and you're bringing up like really, really big issues. And sometimes it's someone who may be working off of an old framework and a misunderstanding with what's needed for right now and the moment. And in those situations, then leadership needs to be replaced. Like, but, if you're going to replace leadership, it really needs to be grounded in the idea of the protection and safety and love for one another. And that needs to be the forefront of any activity. And compassion leads us in that direction. And that's not only do I understand that it's important for me to show up and care for one another, it's important for my institutions to behave in the same way, because our communities are an extension of us. Like, we are embedded in our communities. Our communities are a part of us just as much as we are a part of them. And we do need to show up for each other in this way. And it's important to request, but it's also important to demand when necessary.
Both of you bring up this point where I want to dig a little deeper on is, yes, we are made up of our community, but I think there's a deep craving right now, a deep, deep human connection craving, right? We've gone so deep into the world of AI, like people are building relationships with their chat GPT. They're using their chat GPT as their therapist, as their friend, as, to like heal some of that loneliness. And I remember hearing this and I thought it was really powerful. Is that everyone wants to be, the village, no one wants to be the villager, right? And when I hear about Compassion It and what you're doing, it's about the way that we can actually build more of that cultural change, whether it's in the institutions that are going to lead it, but also just from the bottom up. It really is about those moments of like, how are you showing up as the compassionate? How are you taking that action that's going to then show evidence that this can exist? It can coexist. If anything, it can better the institutions. It can better, our livelihood, right? What is that? I think about, on TikTok, sometimes I watch these social experimental videos where they show, this guy is pretending to be blind and he grabs onto people and they like jerk away and they're like, oh my gosh. And then it's like finally the one kind person who's like, yes, hold my hand as we walk. Or, the woman who's pretending to be pregnant, who's trying to go down the escalator with her stroller. Like, you see these like social experiments that they're now playing the video on, and you see how much of our society is almost like scared to show compassion because they're scared of like, well, I don't know who you are. Like, there's stranger danger in their way, right? So yeah, I'd love your thoughts
Yeah.
around that.
Yeah. There's a professor, Nicholas Epley, at the University of Chicago, who would run an experiment with his economics students. And they would there's a train station, and it's speaking with commuters who are in a suburb outside of Chicago going into Chicago for work. So this is something that they do regularly, the individuals, and they offer a $5 gift card to say that for this train ride, which is about 45 minutes or so, speak to the person sitting next to you. And at the end of that train ride, there's someone to give them a survey to say, how was that experience? Before they start the conversation, they ask them, how do you think this will go? And people always say, this is going to go terribly. Why would I speak to a stranger, someone that I don't know? This is going to go awful. And at the end of that train ride, they asked them how it go. How did it go? And they respond with, it was pleasant. Like, it was actually pretty cool. Like, the person that I was sitting next to was like a dope person. Like, this is great. Now, that doesn't negate, the possibility that, yeah, some that could go terribly. Like there are a lot of different dynamics around safety that you have to consider, and someone who may take an opportunity that's not ideal. But how rare that is not genuinely appreciated. That usually at any given time, you're safe. The people around you mean you no harm. As a matter of fact, if something were happening and people felt that they had the power to help you, they would most of the time. Strangers help each other all the time. Like we have adopted these myths about the people around us that they're inherently scary, that they inherently mean you harm, and that they're trying to hurt you when that's obviously not the case and obviously not the situation that we live in. It's a misinterpretation of the context in which we find ourselves. And yeah, like that's missing. But it really does take a compassionate lens to really be able to observe that. Because naturally, if I see 100 people and one of those persons gave me the scariest look that I've ever seen, then I'm going to remember that person. I'm not going to remember the 99 that smiled at me because that's a safety thing. Like, hey, this scary person is still out there. They may come get me. Those 99 people that smiled, they're going to go on about their lives and we may never meet. So why would I spend my time, really relishing in the fact that like I'm surrounded by these wonderful people when there's a scary person out there? And like that's human instinct. And like that doesn't
Yeah, we're
mean that you're a
responding
bad
to our
person.
biology. We're just
Yeah.
responding to survival of the survival tactics.
Yeah.
Oh,
Now,
that's
what's
so
despicable is when that is weaponized, right?
yeah.
When someone takes advantage of our biology for their own means and to spread nonsense or maliciousness, then like that deserves scrutiny, right? And compassion is the gateway to that scrutiny in that like don't harm people. Don't take advantage of people in these kinds of ways. This is why we have protections in place. This is why policy gets passed to say, hey, no, you can't take advantage of people in these kinds of ways. And we just need to be reminded of that, in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
And I
Wow.
want to make another point about
Mhm.
what you were talking about, Pyle, the folks on TikTok who maybe aren't helping others. I think what we have today that is unique to this time of history is we have these cell phones,
Mhm.
and our attention is rarely in the present moment in today's world. And we have
Yeah.
to be very intentional about being present because if we're not going to notice the opportunities to help others. So whether I listen to, I see people walking around with their AirPods on all the time, they're listening to something, they're looking at something. People are rarely present and open to seeing opportunities for compassion. And that's really part of the work that we do. And these wristbands help a lot. When you have a compassionate wristband on, it reminds you, oh, yeah, this matters to me. I'm open for opportunities to be compassionate. I'm present right now to see the suffering around me. I'm also present to my own suffering and able to offer myself compassion in moments of struggle instead of just having my head buried in my phone and ignoring my feelings. So I do want to point that out, that this ability to be present in today's world is so much harder because of everything is being designed to take our attention away from the present moment.
That's so beautifully said, Sarah. That, and again, everything you're saying, it's like, and I think this is something that's really important. And I feel like people are going to connect to this is that even me, right? Where it's like I talk about empathy and I talk about compassion, all these things. But the points that you're bringing up is so true. It's like we know this on an intellectual level. We know, and we're almost consciously recognize that we're like spending too much time here. We're doing these things, but we're not thinking about what is the consequence of that. And the consequence of that is the fact that we are missing moments to show up with compassion. We're missing moments of like when people are talking about like, how do I get more human connection? Be compassionate, compassion that moment. Like, I'm feeling lonely. I'm craving that. Okay, here's a moment of compassion. I was just in Mexico City and actually I like had just gone out of the airport and I called my Uber and I was heading to meet my friends. And there was a woman standing there, American woman, and she started looking over to me. She goes, "Is your Uber working? Is your phone working?" I'm like, "Yeah, my Uber's fine." She could not for the life of her get it to work. It was her first time in Mexico City. She was getting really nervous. And, just obviously spent about 2-3 minutes with her trying to help her. And I noticed she's a stand-up woman. She's fine. And I said, where are you headed? And I noticed she's heading like 5 minutes away from where I was going. I'm like, hop into my Uber. It's fine. I'll drop you. And then you can get your phone to work once you're at the hotel. And, you've got your friends will be there. In that time, it was so serendipitous. We ended up talking. We had the same life. Like, she lived in New York. She's actually from New York. She's in LA now. I'm a diehard New York fan. If I could marry the city, I would. And we're talking about that. We're talking about our work in, like my work in empathy and her work, and she's an executive at the space. And I was just like, we ended up connecting. We ended up exchanging phone numbers, and we're actually going to be meeting up. I just built a friend in LA, where I do tend to lack a bit of community here, by offering someone an Uber ride who was stressing out about how do I figure this out in a foreign country. And I share that with, as the last question I want to ask you both is that what could be, if there's one tactical thing that someone can do on a daily basis that you can leave listeners with, what is the one compassionate thing that they could do that would end up having a butterfly effect and transforming even just the people around them, the friends around them, the work around them, etc.?
Yeah, first I would say compassionate. Right? Get yourself a wristband, flip that wristband every day. But I would say one of the things that's important is to connect with others in a very human way, as a way of reminding you that we're all people at the end of the day, right? All of us, we're all people. We're all in this together, and we need to remember that, right? We can't forget our humanity in, all of what's going on at the institutional level with, all of the things that are going on. It's just to remember that we're all people, and that these things ebb and flow. So I train in nonviolence, and one of my favorite principles, as laid out by Dr. King in his 6 principles of nonviolence, is that the universe tends towards justice, and this kind of idea of this trust that all of your good, all of that is good within you, that you offer to the world as much as possible, is enough to change the world. And you got to start there, and you got to believe that. Even when, it's tested that, like, oh my gosh, people, like, why are we doing this? Just always trust that what you recognize is good, right? Your instinct and understanding for compassion is gonna carry us through as a practice forever. It's always gonna win out at the end of the day. You just have to trust it. When you can do that and you practice compassion every day, it'll be better. Maybe it's not going to be next year. Maybe it'll be 500 years from now, but you just got to trust the process. You just got to trust the process.
I want to give a little bit more hope
but
than the
it's not
500 years. Let's say that if you practice it every day, you will see shift happen in a year from now.
Well, I mean, you gotta, the use of the word universe is particularly powerful in that expression because it is beyond you. Okay, you don't always have to imagine an end that you'll see. Like, it's okay to imagine an end that you can't see. As a matter of fact, that's even more powerful because what you can accomplish in your lifetime, a greater thing can be accomplished beyond your lifetime, if that makes any sense. Which means that if you can imagine in that beyond your lifetime, oh man, you're cooking with fire. So nothing can put that out.
Yeah. Sara?
I think my act of compassion to challenge or to leave people with is to connect with your neighbors. Get to know the people who live near you, and so that you have people you can reach out to if you need support in a pinch, or if you need a cat sitter, or if you need a stick of butter, as cliche as that sounds. I know we're in the middle of a loneliness epidemic, and many of us spend a lot of time behind our screens. And just this challenge, like Burrell said, like that your neighbors might be strangers right now, but making that deliberate connection can really enhance your life in a beautiful way. So that's my challenge to everyone, is to push themselves to get to know the people who are the people in your neighborhood, as Sesame Street would say.
Well, thank you both. Thank you, Burrell. Thank you, Sara, for being here and just talking about the power of compassion and actionizing it. Is that a word? Actionizing? Whatever.
It is
and
now.
making it actionable. that was really powerful about the power of imagining a world that goes beyond you. But it starts with that neighbor. It starts with that one independent action you can take today by staying present in the moment. So thank you so much, both of you. And I'd love for, everyone to know how they can find you, how they can connect with you. Please share whatever that looks like for you guys.
CompassionIt.com. You can learn more about our work there. And both Burrell and I are on LinkedIn as well.
We'll have that in the notes for everyone to connect with. But thank you so much again. I could probably talk to you guys forever about this, and we'll have to think about some other ways for us to come back together. But thank you again. This was really, really wonderful.
I really hope that you enjoyed this episode, and I just have one favor to ask you. If you could just make sure to hit that subscribe button, leave a rating and review, it's going to help us tremendously to make sure that we reach as many people as possible that you think should be listening to our episodes. I'll see you next week for another episode, and thank you so much for leaving that one review, that one subscription, and sharing this with your friends.